Montana Territory, spring of 1883. The wind howled long across the plains as the stagecoach door slammed shut behind her, and Priscilla Dearing stepped down onto the dusty street of Blue Rock with her chin raised and heart cracking. She had traveled over 800 miles from St. Louis, clutching her letter of promise like a lifeline. The man who had written it, a prosperous blacksmith named Thomas Elmer, had described himself as a widower in need of companionship, someone who would cherish a woman in her 30s with a steady nature and experience in homemaking. But the moment Thomas laid eyes on her, standing there in her best wool coat and handmade bonnet, he frowned sharply. "You didn't say you were that old," he said flatly, looking past her as if she had already vanished. "I am 36, she replied, her voice steady but small. "You wrote you were looking for maturity. I was not expecting someone nearly 40, he said, crossing his arms. "I want someone who can give me children. You look worn out already." His words cut clean through her. She stood still while he waved the stagecoach driver over and handed him a few coins. "Get her back to town," he muttered. "This won't work." The driver hesitated, glancing at her, but she shook her head. "I am not cargo," she whispered, mostly to herself. She turned away and walked down the street with her carpet bag in her hand and nowhere to go. The only boarding house sat at the edge of town, run by a widow named Mrs. Tilson, who looked her over with a sharp eye but offered her a room and a slice of pie without asking too many questions. "I will pay," Priscilla said. "I have enough for a week." "Then you have a week to rest, Mrs. Tilson said, placing the pie in front of her. "After that, we will see." By morning, word had already spread. The mail-order bride too old to be wanted alone, rejected, and out of place. She walked through town with her head high, but the stairs still found her. It was late on the second afternoon when she first saw him. He stood at the far end of the general store loading sacks of feed into a wagon, tall, sun-worn, and solid. His shirt was rolled to the elbow, revealing arms marked by years of ranch work. He turned just as she passed, and their eyes met not in curiosity, but in something quieter. Recognition, maybe? He dipped his head, respectful. "Ma'am," he said. She gave a nod, nothing more, and kept walking. That evening, Mrs. Tilson paused in the hallway outside her room. "That man you saw at the store, that was Vernon Fielding," she said. "Owns a spread west of here. Lost his wife 2 winters back. Has 2 children, both under 10. Priscilla looked up from her sewing. "Why are you telling me?" "Because he is a good man. And you look like someone who needs a good one." The next morning, Priscilla crossed paths with him again outside the church, where she had come to ask about teaching work. He was tying a saddlebag to his horse when he noticed her. "You are the woman from St. Louis," he said, not unkindly. Her shoulders tensed. "And you are the man everyone keeps mentioning." He smiled faintly. "I suppose I am. I am not looking for anyone," she said before he could say more. "I did not offer anything," he replied. "But I would like to." She blinked. "I heard what happened," he said gently. "I am sorry for it. Men can be fools." She studied him for a moment, torn between caution and something warmer. "You do not know me. I know what it feels like to be left behind," he said simply. "My wife died of fever. Left me with a ranch and 2 children who ask about her every night." Something loosened in her chest, not pity, but understanding. He stepped back. "I will not trouble you. But if you find yourself needing a place to start over, my place is quiet. And I could use help." She hesitated. "You would offer me work?" "I would offer you a home," he said. "If you wanted it." Her breath caught. "You do not even know if I can cook." "I do not need a cook," he said. "I need someone kind." She looked down at her gloved hands. "And what would I be to you?" His voice was steady. "If you let me, you would be everything." That night, she sat awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling while the wind pushed against the walls. She thought of all the years spent waiting for someone to see her, not as a used-up woman, but as someone worth choosing. By the morning, she had packed her bag. Vernon met her at the edge of town, his wagon hitched and the children in the back, a girl named Catherine, 8, with her mother's dark hair, and a boy named Keaton, 5, with bright eyes and a shy smile. Priscilla climbed up beside them, her hands folded tight in her lap. Vernon looked over at her, his expression unreadable. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded once. "I am." The trail was long and the land wide, but his presence beside her was steady. He did not press her for answers. He did not ask about the man who had turned her away. Instead, as the sun dipped low and the ranch came into view, a modest house near the tree line, smoke curling from the chimney, he said, "You can stay for a day or forever. I will not ask more than you want to give." She looked at him then, really looked. And something inside her shifted. "I will stay," she said quietly. "And we will see." He smiled just a little. And beside her, the children leaned close, already warming to her. The wind settled. The road behind them stretched miles long, but ahead there was something new. Something waiting. And for the first time in years, Priscilla felt it, hope. The ranch was quieter than Priscilla expected. The cottonwoods lining the creek carried the sound of their leaves like distant water, and the air smelled of damp earth and iron tools. Vernon showed her the kitchen first, where clean pots hung from wooden pegs and a hand broom leaned in the corner. The stove still held warmth from an earlier fire, and the windows faced east, letting in the morning light. "The children sleep in the loft," he said, setting her bag beside the door. "There's a spare room on the ground floor." She touched the door frame lightly. "You keep a tidy place." "My wife had a way of setting order," he said. "I've tried to hold to it." She didn't ask more. He didn't offer. They moved through the house with practical words: where the well pump was, how to latch the shutters if wind came up sudden, which hens lay best. The children watched from the porch steps, Catherine's knees pulled to her chest, Keaton's small fingers worrying a pine twig. Outside, Vernon led her to the edge of the corral. "I'll be up before sun to check the west fence." "You're welcome to come, or stay here with the young ones. They know their chores." "I'll stay," she said. He nodded once, then reached for the reins of a saddled gelding. "If you change your mind, follow the creek past the split rock. I won't be far." Priscilla spent the morning on simple tasks: sweeping dust from the corners, boiling water for washing, showing Catherine how to patch the heel of a sock with even stitches. Keaton, quiet and watchful, brought her a smooth stone from the yard and left it on the table without a word. By noon, the sun had warmed the porch boards. She sat with a cup of coffee, watching the children string scraps of cloth into a wind flag. "Papa don't talk much," Catherine said suddenly. Priscilla glanced at her. "Neither do I. He used to sing with Mama," the girl added. "Not now." The boy looked up, then back down again. Priscilla reached over and tied a green strip to the twine. "Sometimes quiet is the only way to keep something from breaking." Catherine didn't answer, but handed her the next piece of cloth. That evening, Vernon returned with dust on his boots and a line of sun across his neck. He paused on the porch, watching as Priscilla stirred stew from the garden's last root vegetables. The children sat nearby, drawing shapes in the ash with sticks. "I saw fresh tracks near the back fence," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Could be elk, maybe a lone stray from the herd." Priscilla lifted the ladle. "Are they known to break fencing?" "Only if they're startled." He set the cloth aside. "I'll take a look at first light." She nodded, then turned back to the stove. After supper, the children climbed the ladder to the loft, Keaton yawning wide. Priscilla washed the dishes while Vernon sat at the table, carving a new handle for the short-handled hoe. The only sounds were the scrape of the blade and the soft clink of crockery. "You came here with no ties," he said after a while. "That takes grit." "I didn't feel brave," she said. "Only tired of waiting for someone else to decide if I was worth keeping." He looked up. "You are." She didn't speak, but the grip on her towel softened. Later, she stood at the back door, feeling the cool air slide in. The moon had risen, pale and full, casting long shadows across the yard. Vernon joined her, arms crossed loosely. "There's peace in open sky." "There is," she agreed. "More than I've had in some time." He studied the dark horizon. "I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for." "I wouldn't have come if I wasn't ready to begin again," she said. "I just don't know how to begin." "You already have," he said, quiet and certain. She turned to him fully then, their faces close in the silver light. He didn't reach for her, and she was grateful for that. But he didn't look away either. "We'll let it grow slow," he said, voice low. "Like spring wheat after a hard winter." She nodded once. "That would suit me." And then they stood a while longer, silent, until the cold nudged them back inside. The fire had burned low, but it was enough. By the third week, the rhythm of the ranch had settled around Priscilla like a well-worn shawl, familiar in its weight, but still carrying the scent of a life not yet fully hers. The days unfolded in measured tasks, tending to the kitchen garden, mending shirts grown thin at the elbows, brushing dust from the windowsills where spring pollen clung in pale films. Each morning, Vernon left before sunrise, his silhouette outlined against the faint light as he saddled his mare and rode out toward the ridge or south pasture, depending on what needed doing. She never asked where, and he never offered more than a quiet "back before dusk." But it was enough. That morning, Priscilla stacked the last of the dried linens into the chest at the foot of her bed when she heard voices from outside, not Vernon's, but sharper, faster. She stepped onto the porch to find a man dismounting beside Vernon's wagon. He was younger, clean-shaven, with a stock ledger tucked beneath his arm. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, brushing dust from his sleeves. Vernon came around the corner of the house, wiping his hands on a scrap of burlap. "Didn't expect you out this far, Josiah. Been riding since first light. Word came from Fort Keogh. They're looking to purchase beef next month, fair price too. I figured you'd want in." Vernon glanced toward the barn. "I'll need to see how many steers are ready." Josiah followed his gaze, then turned to Priscilla with a polite nod. "You must be Miss Dearing." She returned the greeting, cool but not unkind. "Vernon's mentioned you," Josiah said. "Said the house feels steadier these days." Vernon shifted slightly, but said nothing. "I'd like to help check the herd," Josiah added. "I'll meet you at the holding pen," Vernon said, already stepping toward the barn. Josiah tipped his hat and followed, his boots kicking up loose straw. As they disappeared, Priscilla turned to find Catherine watching from the porch rail. "Who is he?" the girl asked. "Someone who does business with your father." Catherine frowned. "He talks fast." Priscilla looked out toward the pasture. "Some men think sound fills silence better than patience does." That evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, Vernon returned with mud on his boots and a stiff set to his shoulders. He washed outside at the barrel, then came in as Priscilla was drying the last dish. "Josiah's eager," he said quietly. "But not always wise. You've worked with him before?" "Off and on, since my early days." "He's ambitious. Doesn't always see the land for what it can sustain." She set the towel down. "And you?" "I'd rather sell slow and keep my soil than push the cattle too lean." She nodded once. "That's steadier." He looked at her, then moved to the hearth where the fire had settled to coals. "You've taken to the place." "I have. Even with the noise that tries to follow me home sometimes? There's still quiet where it matters." He turned then, facing her fully. "I've been thinking. About what's next. I don't want you to feel you're only passing through." "I don't," she said. "But I've wondered if you meant for me to stay as I am, or become something more." His brow lifted slightly, not in surprise, but with the weight of something long held. "I meant for you to belong," he said. "If you'll have that." She stepped closer, the room narrowing to the space between them. "I have no other place to go," she said. "But I've found something here that feels like a beginning. If you want me to stay not as a guest, but as a wife, I would. His breath caught, quiet and deep. I do. He didn't reach for her then. He simply stood, steady and sure, offering her the place beside him without demand or haste. I'll need a ring, he said softly. I don't, she replied, her voice low. But if it eases the world's eyes, I won't refuse it. We'll speak with the preacher Sunday. She gave a small nod, and though no one smiled, the air between them warmed. That night she tucked the children into bed without a word of the change to come. The loft creaked softly as they turned beneath their quilts. From outside came the low call of an owl and the hush of wind through the grass. Priscilla stood by the window until the stars blinked in full, her hands folded against the sill. Behind her, Vernon moved through the house with quiet steps, and the sound of him there near but unintrusive settled something inside her that had gone restless for too many years. She did not think of St. Louis, nor the man who had turned her away. She thought only of the home she was shaping, and the man who had offered her not rescue, but respect. And that, she knew, was love worth staying for. The wedding took place the following Sunday in the small clapboard church at the edge of Blue Rock, where the grass grew thick around the fence posts, and the bell rope had frayed from years of use. The preacher, a soft-spoken man with a crooked collar and a daughter of his own, read from the Book of Ruth while the congregation looked on. It was not a large crowd, just a few ranch families, Mrs. Tilson from the boarding house, and the storekeep's wife who brought a jar of wild flowers tied with twine. Priscilla wore her best gray dress, the same one she had arrived in, now pressed and brushed clean. Catherine stood beside her, holding the bouquet with both hands, her braid coiled neatly at the nape of her neck. Keaton clung to Vernon's left leg, his chin tucked low, but his eyes wide with the solemn weight of the moment. When the vows were spoken, Vernon's voice was low but unwavering. I'll not promise riches, he said, but I'll give all I've got to what we build. Priscilla met his gaze. That's all I ask? The rings had been shaped by Vernon himself, a pair of slender bands cut from a softened horseshoe nail, polished smooth and etched with a single line down the center. He had filed them by lantern light in the days leading up to the wedding, and when he slipped hers onto her finger, it fit without struggle. Afterward, folks gathered in the churchyard, where the preacher's wife passed out slices of molasses cake and a jug of cider made from last year's apples. Vernon's nearest neighbor, a weathered Swede named Henrik, played a fiddle so worn it had no varnish left, but the tune he coaxed from it was gentle and true. Catherine found Priscilla by the well and tugged her sleeve. Do we call you Ma now? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Priscilla crouched beside her. Only if you feel it fits. Catherine looked at her a long moment, then gave a small nod. It does. That night, the house felt different, not for any change in its shape or sound, but for the way Vernon's coat now hung beside hers on the peg, and how the children's laughter carried longer into the evening. They had moved her things into the main bedroom, but there was no rush in it. Vernon had simply said, "There's room here," and left the door open. As dusk settled, they sat on the back steps watching the fireflies rise from the grass. Vernon handed her a folded piece of paper, the edges smudged from handling. "It's a deed," he said. "Half the land now in your name." She stared at it, then looked up at him. "You didn't need to." "I did," he said. "You share the work. You ought to share the ground it's built on." She traced the inked line of her name. "No man's ever given me earth before." He turned his palm up between them, and she laid her hand there without hesitation. The following days passed with calmer ease. Vernon finished mending the east fence while Priscilla worked with the children on their letters by lamplight. She taught Keaton to write his name with a stub of charcoal, and when he managed it without turning the K backward, he grinned so wide it showed the gap where his front tooth had been. One afternoon, a wagon arrived from town carrying a cedar chest Vernon had bartered for with a side of smoked beef. Priscilla opened it to find bolts of muslin, a new kettle, and 3 skeins of dyed wool, one each in indigo, russet, and wheat. "I figured a home ought to have things chosen for it," he said. She ran her hand over the wool. You remembered the colors I liked. I remember what matters. That night, as the wind picked up and the shutters creaked faintly, she sat beside the hearth knitting the first row of a new shawl. Vernon poured 2 cups of coffee and set one beside her, then lowered himself onto the floorboards with his back to the wall. I've been thinking, he said. Come autumn, we'll need help with the harvest. Henrik's boy is strong, but not quick. I can ask around town, she said. The Tilson girl's cousin's looking for work. He nodded. If you vouch for her, that's enough. The fire crackled as they sat in companionable quiet, the kind that didn't need filling. When the clock struck 9, she set the needles aside and leaned back in her chair. You've built something good here, Vernon Fielding. He looked over at her, eyes soft. Now it's ours. And in that moment she believed it fully, not as a promise, but as something already planted, already growing. By mid-July, the hay had begun to yellow at the edges, and the air held that dry weight that meant the rains were behind them for a while. Priscilla had taken to rising just after Vernon, often stepping into the yard barefoot to gather eggs or hang damp linens before the sun warmed the porch steps. The days had grown long in a way that made time settle deeper, not faster. Catherine had taken to reading aloud from the old primer kept in the trunk near the hearth, her voice steady, if uncertain on the longer words. Keaton, more often than not, fell asleep with his hand curled around a small wooden horse Vernon had carved from a scrap of pine. There was a rhythm to it all now, a quiet pulse that had shaped itself around them without fanfare. Late one afternoon, Vernon returned from a ride south with a folded note in his breast pocket, and his hat brimmed damp with sweat. He handed the paper to Priscilla while he poured water at the basin. Henrik's cousin's boy is coming up from Miles City, he said. Wants to learn fence work. Might stay through harvest. She read the note once, then tucked it into the kitchen drawer beside the extra buttons. We've room, she said. And the extra hands will help when the potatoes come in. He leaned on the edge of the table, watching her. You've made this place move easier, Priscilla. I knew you were the right one, but I didn't expect it would feel this natural. She reached for the sack of beans that needed sorting. It's not easy I bring, she said. Just care. He stayed quiet at that, but she saw the way his hand brushed the edge of the table before walking out to the barn again. He'd always been that way, speaking through small gestures more than words. That evening, after the children had been put to bed, Priscilla stitched the hem of Keaton's Sunday shirt by lamplight, while Vernon repaired a lantern wick across the room. The silence between them was companionable, but not without weight. Do you miss it? He asked, voice low. She looked up. What's that? The city. The noise, the shops. What you left behind. She shook her head. I never belonged in it. I was always too quiet for its pace. Folks there don't look you full in the face when they speak. Here they do. He nodded once, then leaned back in the chair, legs stretched toward the stove. I used to think if I kept the ranch running, that'd be enough. Just do the work, raise the children right. But a house without warmth doesn't hold. She laid the shirt aside, hands folded in her lap. It holds cold. He looked up at her then, not from across the table, but like a man seeing the last piece of something he hadn't realized was missing. I didn't know I could have both, he said, voice rough. A life that works, and someone who knows how to keep it steady without fading herself. She rose, crossed the room, and knelt beside his chair, resting her head against his chest. His arms came around her, slow and certain. You've got it now, she said. Don't plan to let it go. They stayed like that for a long while, the fire low. Outside, wind moved through the dry grass, and somewhere near the barn, the horses shifted in their stalls. 2 weeks later, the hired boy arrived, a wiry young man named Eli with a quick step and a polite mouth. He worked hard, didn't complain, and kept his boots outside the back door without being told. Catherine took to asking him questions about city trains, and Keaton followed him around with a ball of twine like a second shadow. Vernon watched it all with a quiet satisfaction. By late August, the land had begun its slow turn toward gold. Priscilla canned tomatoes in the kitchen while Vernon repaired a cracked yoke under the cottonwoods. They worked side by side most days now, no longer needing to speak everything aloud. The children grew sun-browned and sure-footed, and every evening ended with the four of them gathered around the table, sometimes with stew, sometimes with nothing but bread and butter, but always together. On the first cool morning of September, Priscilla stood at the edge of the garden, shawl wrapped tight, watching the mist rise from the creek. Vernon came up behind her, slid his hand into hers. "I've been thinking," he said, "about building a second room off the back. For when the children are grown, give them space when they visit." She didn't answer right away. Then she turned to him, eyes soft. "You see that far ahead now?" "I do." She leaned into him. "So do I." That winter they slept warm through the frost, kept fed by the root cellar and the strength they built through quiet days and honest labor. There were no grand declarations, no sudden turns, only the slow, certain unfolding of two lives braided together. And when spring came again, the land answered them with green shoots and calving cries in the pasture. Catherine began her first sampler, Keaton learned to ride without a lead rope, and Vernon built a bench beneath the cottonwoods, just wide enough for two. They sat there sometimes after supper, hands clasped, watching the sun fall behind the hills. And in the quiet that followed, there was no emptiness. Only peace. Earned, kept, and wholly shared.